There is a planet in the outer spiral that has no name in any living language. Every species that tried to name it stopped using the name eventually, because the ones who went there stopped coming back, and the ones who didn't go decided, collectively and without discussion, that naming a thing gives it too much power over you. The Veth Compact cataloged it as Survey Remnant 7 Kale. The Murani sovereignty called it the Mouth. The Doric Assembly, who lost 3 full survey vessels in 11 rotations and then voted unanimously never to return, called it nothing. They deleted the coordinates from their navigational records. They deleted the coordinates. Do you understand what that means? The Doric Assembly, who once charted the inside of a collapsing star for academic purposes, chose to unmake a location rather than risk accidentally going back. I was stationed aboard the Tessavain, third chair intelligence officer, when command told us we were being assigned escort duty for a new survey team. I asked who was surveying. Command told me. I filed 3 consecutive requests for emergency reassignment in the same afternoon. All 3 were denied. My supervisor, a patient woman named Sarith who had survived 2 wars and 1 diplomatic incident that is still technically classified, looked at me across her desk with an expression I can only describe as well-documented pity. "You'll be fine," she said. She did not sound like she believed it. The humans arrived at our docking ring at 600 standard. There were 43 of them. They were laughing. They were laughing about something one of them had said. I don't know what. The translation matrix caught the shape of the joke but not the interior of it, some self-referential thing about a prior mission, a name I didn't recognize, a specific type of failure that they apparently found hilarious in retrospect. 3 of them were still wiping their eyes when the docking seal released. I had prepared a briefing. I had prepared 3 briefings, actually, each one calibrated for a different level of professionalism. The first was formal: objectives, projected hazard thresholds, recommended evacuation protocols. The second was simplified in case they were the kind of soldiers who preferred direct instruction. The third was what Sorith calls my nervous document, 51 slides color-coded with footnotes. I pulled up the third one the moment I saw them. Their lead, a human called Sergeant Vasquez, who I would later learn had opinions about everything and reservations about nothing, looked at my display screen, looked at me and said, "How many of those slides are about the atmosphere?" 11, I said. "We've got it," she said. She did not take the briefing document. Survey Remnant 7 Kale sits at the intersection of 3 competing gravitational bodies, which gives it weather that most planetary models describe as theoretically impossible, and most survivors describe as personal. The atmosphere is breathable, barely technically in the way that a room on fire is technically a room, a compound cocktail of nitrogen, oxygen, and 2 additional gases for which Veth science had only recently developed words. The surface temperature fluctuates between survivable with equipment and do not within the span of a single rotation cycle. The fauna. I had an entire slide about the fauna. Nobody took the slide. What I can tell you about the fauna, from what the existing survey data showed before the existing survey team stopped producing data, is this: they are large, they are fast, they operate in coordinated groups that do not behave like any predator model we have. And at some point in the geological record, they apparently won a war against the planet's previous apex-level species so thoroughly that said species exists now only as fossil record and 1 disputed academic paper. The Doric lost their survey vessels not to mechanical failure, not to the atmosphere, not to the weather that the models said was impossible. They lost them to things that lived in the rock. Timestamp 743.11. Vasquez asked me while I was running a pre-descent atmospheric calibration that required my full attention and both of my secondary processing threads, what the planet's name was. I told her it didn't have one. She considered this for approximately 4 seconds. "We'll call it Paula," she said. I looked at her. "After my ex," she said, seemed accurate. I added this to the log and decided not to ask follow-up questions. The descent vehicle separated from the Tessavain at 900. I was in it. This had not been in my original assignment parameters. My original assignment was escort and observation from a safe orbital distance. Somewhere between the docking ring and departure, Vasquez had requested an intelligence officer for ground-level contextual support, and my supervisor had approved it in the time it took me to get a cup of the terrible recycled coffee that the Tessavain's galley produces, and that I keep drinking anyway because the ritual of it steadies me. The coffee was cold by the time I got back to my station. The approval was already filed. I brought the cold coffee with me into the descent vehicle. It felt important to have it. The first thing that happens when you enter Paula's atmosphere, when you enter that atmosphere, is that the vehicle starts making a sound it wasn't making before. Not an alarm, not a structural warning. Something lower than that, a vibration that sits in the back of your teeth and doesn't leave. I noticed it at approximately 40 seconds into descent and began composing a note to engineering. One of the humans sitting across from me said, "Oh, that's just the pressure differential. Sounds worse than it is." She was reading something on a personal device. She did not look up. "How do you know that?" I asked. "We prepped," she said. I thought about my 11 slides on the atmosphere. I looked down at my cold coffee. The landing was fine. The word is fine. It was technically fine in the way that a controlled fall is technically controlled. What happened immediately after the landing is what I want to document carefully, because I have reviewed the footage 17 times since and I am still not certain I understand the sequence of events. The hatch opened. The atmosphere hit us hot, strange, with that second layer smell underneath the sulfur, something biological and old, like the planet itself had a glandular system and we just stepped inside it. The humans walked out. Not cautiously, not in defensive formation, not with weapons raised, not with the measured tactical spacing that every combat doctrine I have ever reviewed prescribes for a first step onto an unsurveyed surface. They walked out the way you walk out of a vehicle when you've arrived somewhere you intended to be. Vasquez put her boots on the ground, looked left, looked right. Looked up at the sky, which was the color of an old bruise, yellow-purple, with cloud formations that moved faster than wind had any right to move, and said quietly to no one in particular, "All right, Paula, let's see what you've got." Timestamp 1034.58. They found the first track at approximately 90 minutes after landing. I know what Doric fauna tracks look like from the survey data. I have the reference images in my secondary memory. Wide base, distributed weight, 6-point contact pattern suggesting something that moves on a body plan that doesn't prioritize speed but does prioritize leverage. These were not those tracks. These were deeper, more recent. The soil displacement at the edge of the print suggested something that had been here within the last hour, standing still, facing the landing site. Standing still, facing the landing site. Vasquez crouched next to the track, touched the edge of it with 2 fingers, looked at the angle of the approach path. The tracks came from the eastern ridge 300 meters out, stopped and then turned and left, came close enough to observe, did not attack. "Smart," she said. She said it the way you say interesting about a problem you intend to solve. "It was watching us land," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "Yeah. And then it left." "Yeah. That's an assessment behavior, that's threat assessment. The Doric data doesn't show threat assessment, it shows immediate." "Different animal," Vasquez said. She stood up, looked at the ridge. "This one wanted information first." She turned back toward the group, made a hand signal I didn't recognize. 2 humans peeled off to the right flank without being told which direction to go. "So do we," she said. "I want to document something here that I did not include in any of the 51 slides because it is not a data point. It is an impression and I distrust impressions, but I am trying to log accurately." When Vasquez looked at that ridge, at the place where something large and intelligent enough to gather information had stood and watched us and then deliberately retreated, she did not look afraid. She looked like someone who had just found out the game was more interesting than expected. I drank the rest of my cold coffee. It tasted like recycled regret. It was obscurely exactly what I needed. Timestamp 1301.44. At approximately 12:47, the temperature dropped 14 degrees in 6 minutes. Not the gradual fluctuation the models predicted, not the slow cycling that our equipment had been calibrated for. 14 degrees, 6 minutes. The kind of shift that, according to the atmospheric data, should not have been possible without a pressure front, and there was no pressure front. There was nothing on the sensors. Nothing on the sensors. I was still processing the gap between nothing on sensors and 14-degree drop when Vasquez said down in a voice that contained no inflection at all, and 43 humans dropped flat against the ground in the same second. I did not drop in the same second. I dropped in the second after. Close enough. The thing that crossed the sky above us, low, fast, low enough that I could hear the displacement of air against its body, something between a sound and a pressure, was gone before I had finished the act of looking up. It left a thermal wake. My instruments caught the back edge of it. Mass estimate substantial. Flight pattern deliberate. It had not been hunting. It had been herding. I lay flat on the ground of a planet with no name except Paula, with my cold cup wedged against my chest because I hadn't let go of it when I fell. And I looked at Vasquez, who was already back on one knee, already gesturing, already repositioning her people with that unhurried efficiency that I was beginning to understand was not calmness but something else, some other state I didn't have a word for yet. "They're moving us," she said. Not to me, to herself, working through it. "Something's moving us toward something else." She looked at me then, the first time she'd looked at me like I might have relevant information. "What's east of here?" I pulled up the survey remnants, the partial maps from the Doric teams, the ones they'd made before they stopped making maps. East of our landing site, 3 kilometers, there was a topographical feature the original surveyors had labeled formation cluster before their signal cut out. They had not elaborated on what kind of formation. They had not had time to. "I don't know," I said. Vasquez nodded, like this was the answer she'd expected. "Then that's where we're going." Calith 7 personal note, APPENDED2 log. "The coffee is gone. I am rationing the rest of my supply. 3 more cups if I am careful. I will need to be careful. I have a feeling I will need to be careful about a great many things before this assignment concludes." The planet does not feel like a planet, it feels like something that is paying attention. I keep reminding myself that this is not a scientific observation. I keep being unable to stop thinking it anyway. The formation cluster, when we reached it, turned out to be a canyon. Not a deep canyon, not wide, but the walls were wrong. The rock face had a quality to it that my geological scanner described, with what I can only characterize as bureaucratic helplessness, as inconsistent with known sedimentary processes. The striations ran horizontal, then horizontal again in alternating bands, like something had decided the normal rules of geology were a suggestion. The canyon floor was flat, too flat, flat in the way that cleared spaces are flat. Vasquez stopped at the edge, held up a fist, everyone stopped. "Silence." Paula's silence has texture, that's the only word for it. The wind doesn't stop, it drops below audible range into something you feel in the cartilage of your ear instead. The biological sounds, and there are always biological sounds somewhere, layered under everything, go quiet in sequence, species by species, like a room full of conversations ending one by one when someone important walks in. We stood at the edge of that flat-floored canyon, and the world went quiet around us in sequence. Something knew we were there. Vasquez looked at the canyon floor, looked at the walls, looked at the single narrow entrance on the far side. "Killbox," said the human standing to her left, a broad-shouldered one named Tors, who had said almost nothing since landing and whose presence I had nearly forgotten about until this moment. He said it without emotion, an architectural observation. "Yeah," Vasquez said. "Classic funnel geometry." "Yeah." They looked at each other. Something moved between them, some compressed communication that didn't use words or signals, just the accumulated weight of shared experience. "So we don't go in," I said. Both of them looked at me. Not unkindly. "We go around," Vasquez said. Timestamp 1441. 19. The canyon rim was unstable. This is the kind of thing that the 11 atmosphere slides did not cover, because the 11 atmosphere slides were about atmosphere. The ground situation, geologically speaking, was in a different slide deck 2, which nobody had taken. The rim rock was the same wrong-striped material as the walls, and it had a compressive strength that my scanner put at approximately 60% of what it looked like it should be. Meaning, it looked solid. It was not solid. It would hold weight up to a point, and then it would not hold weight, and the point was not predictable. I communicated this information to Vasquez. She said, She said it the way people say when you've confirmed something they already suspected. "Your scanner give you a variance map?" she asked. I looked. It did. I hadn't thought to look for it because I hadn't thought we were going to walk on the unstable rim, because I hadn't thought we were going to do what we were apparently about to do. "Yes," I said. "Share it." I shared it. The variance map went to her display, and I noticed to every other human's display in the group simultaneously, some shared network I hadn't been plugged into, some infrastructure they'd established without discussing it in front of me. They all received the map at the same time. They all looked at it for approximately 4 seconds. Torres made a small sound in the back of his throat that I think was approval. They spread out. Not randomly. The variance map had shown the strongest ground running along the inner edge of the rim, closer to the drop, and that's where they walked single file, spaced at irregular intervals that I realized after a moment were calibrated to the weight distribution data in the scan. Each human was walking on the path of least geological risk, and they'd worked out the intervals in their heads from a 4-second look at a map while walking. I followed at the back. I put my feet exactly where the human in front of me put hers. The thing that had been hurting us was still hurting us. I know this because my motion sensors, passive, the kind that don't emit anything, the kind that are very good at detecting mass displacement in peripheral zones, registered movement at our flanks the entire time we were on the rim. Not one thing, 3 things, possibly 4, moving parallel to our path, maintaining distance, adjusting when we adjusted. They were keeping us on the rim. Every time we angled toward the interior, toward the harder ground away from the canyon, toward the safer geological profile, the movement on the flank would shift forward, cutting off the angle without ever becoming visible. They were steering us. I understood suddenly, with the particular cold clarity that comes when something stops being hypothetical, that we were not navigating this canyon. We were being navigated. Whatever was out there had a destination in mind, and we were walking toward it, and the canyon had been the first push, and the rim was the second push, and somewhere ahead of us was the third thing. I opened my mouth to say this to Vasquez. She said without turning around, "I know." I closed my mouth. "How long have you known?" I asked after a moment. "Since the temperature drop." Since the temperature drop, since 1247. We had been knowingly walking into a coordinated funnel for almost 2 hours. I had not been consulted about this decision. I thought about mentioning this and then thought about what consultation would have looked like, me suggesting we retreat, Vasquez listening politely, the flank movement cutting off our retreat angle before we finished the conversation. "What's the plan?" I asked. "See what it wants to show us." I thought about this. "That's the plan. Animals that herd don't want to kill you," Torres said from ahead. "They want you somewhere specific. There's a difference." "With respect," I said, "the Doric teams were killed by fauna on this planet." "Different fauna," Vasquez said. "Different behavior pattern. The thing in those tracks thought about us first. Things that think about you first are interested in something. They might be interested in what we taste like. Then they'd have herded us into an enclosed space and rushed us." She had a point. I wrote it in the log because having a record of the point felt important. If I was right and we died, the log would stand. If she was right and we didn't, the log would stand. Either way, documentation. Timestamp 1619.33. The rim ended at a shelf. The shelf overlooked a depression, not natural, or at least not entirely natural, the geometry too regular at its edges, the floor too deliberately arranged. In the center of the depression there was a structure. I want to be precise about this word, structure. Not a rock formation, not a geological accident, a structure. 8 meters tall, roughly conical, made from the same striped canyon rock but fitted together with a precision that my scanner rated at sub-centimeter tolerance. There were openings at its base, not holes, not collapses, but deliberate openings, shaped, the edges smooth. Around the structure, on the depression floor, there were objects. My scanner worked through them while I stood very still on the shelf. Metal alloys, 3 distinct types, none of them native to this region, crystalline materials that matched nothing in the geological survey, polymer compounds, and I ran the scan twice, what appeared to be the casing from a Doric atmospheric sensor, the kind the survey teams used. Not broken, not destroyed, placed. Placed deliberately at the base of the structure in a grouping that had, and I am aware of how this sounds in an intelligence log, spatial logic. An arrangement. The sensor casing was in the center. The other objects were around it, distributed at angles that created a pattern my threat assessment matrix did not have a category for. The Doric hadn't been killed here. They'd been stopped here. And something had kept what they left behind. Vasquez sat down on the shelf edge. Just sat down, legs over the drop, looking at the structure below with the particular quality of stillness that I'd learned meant she was thinking hard. Nobody spoke. The flanking movement that had been packing us for 2 hours had stopped. No motion on the sensors at all. Whatever had been steering us had brought us here and was now waiting. That was the only word that fit, waiting. "They built something," Torres said. He was crouching next to me, looking at his display, running his own scans. Look at the material analysis. That rock isn't quarried, it's worked. They shaped each piece individually, fitted it. The Doric lost equipment here, I said, the sensor casing. They didn't lose it, Vasquez said. I looked at her. They left it, she said, or the ones who made it to this point left it here on purpose. She looked at the arrangement below, the careful spacing, the deliberate geometry, because something asked them to. The canyon, the temperature shift, the herding, the rim with its navigable path, all of it had been not a trap, not a test. A road. It's been trying to communicate, I said. The words came out of me before I'd finished thinking them, but they landed flat, the way true things land flat when you say them out loud for the first time and find that the truth of them is bigger than the sentence. For how long? Tours asked. Nobody answered. Below us, nothing moved. The depression sat still in the yellowing light, the structure stood, the objects at its base held their arrangement. Vasquez looked at the sensor casing for a long time. Then she reached into her kit, pulled out a comms beacon, standard issue, the palm-sized kind, the ones we'd been told to deploy only if the mission went critical, and held it. What are you doing? I asked. Answering, she said. She placed the beacon on the shelf edge precisely facing the structure, stepped back, left it there. Below, nothing. 30 seconds. Then one of the openings at the base of the structure, one of the shaped, deliberate openings, began to change, not opening wider, something inside it shifting, receding from the light. Making room. It worked, Tor said very quietly. Vasquez didn't look surprised. She looked like someone who had placed a bet they'd been confident about and was now watching it pay out, but quietly, privately, because being right had never been the point. Move out, she said, single file, I go first. Timestamp 1714.02. I want to note something for the record before we proceed. I have filed intelligence reports on 47 missions. I have documented first contact scenarios, 3 separate hostile engagement outcomes, 2 planetary quarantine events, and 1 incident that is still classified above my clearance level and about which I can only say that it involved a fruit. In all 47 missions, I have never once written the following sentence into a log. I do not know what happens next. Not because I always knew, because an intelligence officer who writes "I don't know what happens next" into a log has, professionally speaking, announced their own failure to prepare. But I am writing it now. I don't know what happens next. What I know is this: below me, there is a structure built by something that has lived on the worst planet in surveyed space long enough to develop patience. Long enough to learn that the things that come here can be engaged if you approach them slowly enough, carefully enough, if you speak in roads instead of words, in arrangements instead of sentences. Long enough to wait out the Doric. Long enough to still be here. And below me, walking toward that structure, is a human woman who saw a track in the dirt and said smart, not afraid, not reverential, but smart, the way you'd say it about a problem you intended to solve or a mind you intended to meet. I am following her. I have finished my last cup of cold coffee. The cup is in my kit because I cannot bring myself to leave it here. Paula's sky is going dark. Sorith, if this log is recovered, I want it noted that I did object to the ground assignment. I want it noted clearly. The 3 requests are in my personnel file. I also want it noted, and this is not in my personnel file, and I am adding it here, and I recognize that it will be read by people with more authority than me, that I think Vasquez was right. About all of it. The planet didn't want to kill us. It wanted to know if we were worth talking to. I'm still not sure we are, but I think she might be.